All right, how's everybody doing? I hope you had a good weekend. This week's chapter is media and technology, and so I get to talk a little bit about some of my favorite stuff. Hopefully you're not getting too sick of it yet, but we'll get there. In order to start this, well, let me say media and technology is actually a really interesting chapter because the real problem is, well, as with all of these, it's hard to cherry pick what the most interesting thing is. We could talk about a whole lot of different stuff, and I'm open to talking about any of this with you. The part I prepared for today, which some of the social problem students will recognize, is the media and technology. But first I got to tell you a little bit. So I was, I don't know if you guys have seen this. I was cruising around on the internet this morning, I don't remember where, and one of the headlines was 9 celebrities who have open marriages you didn't know about, right? And they had a picture of Rachel Ray on there. Now, I gotta say, Rachel Ray is not the hardest person in the world to look at, and I believe she's about my age, or maybe just a little bit younger. So, of course, I clicked through, and what a stupid thing. It wasn't anything. But I was all excited about Rachel Ray. Had to tell you guys. Okay. Like, maybe she's on the market. Yeah, I doubt it. All right.
Are you married?
Yeah, that would take a little convincing, wouldn't it?
No, babe, I had a really great idea.
Yes, exactly. You know what I was thinking? Okay, so when you look at this chapter, they talk about some of this, and part of the problem with technology is what you're thinking of when you think of technology are the superficial changes, right? So kids these days, they don't know how to use the phone, right? All they know how to do is text. Well, that's a little bit true. I hate getting dumped via Facebook. Well, that's also true. The book has a whole long discussion about how friends has changed because now you have 400 friends, quote unquote, on Facebook, even though you couldn't stand talking to those humans in real life. Yes, that's all true. And we're still figuring out different ways to deal with these different changes. In fact, we went through this 15 years ago when email came around. Email required a completely different set of etiquette than old-fashioned mail because people use it differently. And most everything you hear about complaints about texting or about social media were also complaints that people had about email not that long ago. People fire it off too quickly. They don't think very deeply about what's in it. It's less formal, so there are more typos and such. We've moved to a place now where, if anything, the email feels formal and old-fashioned. And so how we deal with technology and communication has moved forward into the social media sphere or even the text messaging sphere, right? That's just an example. Other things, and I'm happy to talk about any of these if you're interested. Concentration of producers. So while it might seem like there are many, many different media outlets, just like it might seem like there are many, many different consumer packaged goods out there, the number of actual owners of these media outlets is very, very small. Something like 5 or 6 large companies own just about everything. So just like you might watch, you might look at Dove because of their real beauty campaigns. They had one with curls that was on all weekend, or at least it was on all weekend on whatever my girls were watching. And you might think that somehow you're helping the world out. You know, they're owned by the same people that own Axe. And Axe is about as objectifying and stereotypical about women as you could possibly get. So it seems like you have a choice, but it's not a choice. Or Target and Dayton. So Target's it's a little affordable. It's not quite as affordable as Walmart in their market. And Dayton, if you're up in Minneapolis, St. Paul, Dayton is like a Dillard's. It's an upmarket department store. So you might feel like you have choices. The speakers are humming. Hold on. That didn't help. That didn't help. All right, maybe it's just my ears. That's off. That's weird. The NSA is listening to us. And now I froze this up. All right. So you might feel like you have a choice when you go shop at Target instead of Dayton's because you're saving money. But the fact of the matter is, it's all the same company who've just finding different ways to speak to you so that they can make what you want, right? When you start thinking about something like media, this is especially important because media is how we get controversial views, right? And in today's world, the media is more fragmented than ever, and yet behind that really are just a handful of big companies. So that's not really good. The culture gap when it comes to how people use electronics. I have been in the workplace in the last couple of years with people who refuse to text. Why? Because they're 60 or they're 65 and they're ready to retire. But I can't think of anybody 40 or under who doesn't expect to SMS as a regular part of their job. And in fact, many places will assume that you have a smartphone to put their app on while you're doing your job, right? So huge difference there. Difference in the way that people communicate when it comes down to sales. We could talk about that. We hit the etiquette side of society, but if you think about technological change, I've already hinted at this a little bit, but we're moving towards a world where jobs are becoming obsolete more quickly and more quickly and more quickly. And while free marketers have forever assumed that new and better jobs would rise up to replace the ones that are gone, there are now sober, honest futurists who are thinking seriously about what happens when the computers can innovate faster than we can, right? When they can run their own testing. What does that mean for us? Well, it means a few people will have very good jobs. What does it mean for everybody else? Again, huge questions, okay? But I kind of wanted to hit media, all right? And I guess I'm running things, so unless you guys complain too much, that's what we're going to do. Okay, so let's see. The narrative fallacy. When you look back on your life, you have a tendency, we all do this, to try and turn it into a story, right? So I came from humble beginnings and I worked my way up and lo and behold, I made it to here, right? Or, back in 2008, I got laid off, but you'll hear people say this all the time, 2009, it was the best thing that could have happened because I changed blah, 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 and I made this all add up, right? That's because we're building these stories in hindsight. If you were to go back to when you got laid off in 2008, you will notice you had no idea what to do with your life and you were completely terrified. You got a break and you took it because that's how your career works. There's no story there. You're the one that's putting a story onto this so it makes a nice story, if that makes sense. That's the narrative fallacy. But there's a deeper, more important element that goes on here, and that is when it comes to how we process information, we actually try and fit everything into stories. It's a weird thing, but roll with me on this. And the stories are cultural stories. They're not completely made up stories. Now, we've talked about some of these in the last few weeks. We're on week 8 already. How did that happen? Durkheim's collective consciousness. Remember, the idea behind the collective consciousness is there's something out there which is more than all of us just added together, and we base our moral judgments on that collective consciousness. We get a lot of our individual thought from that collective consciousness. We download our language from that collective consciousness. Mead has a generalized other. That was in the socialization chapter. We had the I, the me, and then the generalized other, so that when I look in the mirror and I think, what do I think of that guy? I'm not just thinking, what do I think of that guy? I'm trying to think of what the general world thinks of that guy. And perhaps more importantly, what I think of that guy is very much drawn from the general world, okay? And we can go through all of these. Berger's socially constructed reality, it's a similar idea. It's not exactly the same, but it's similar. Science fiction talks about the hive mind, and when people say something and they want to offend someone for being too herd-like, they'll call them sheeple, right? It's a tremendously degrading thing to say. Oh, what the sheeple think. But there's a truth to what they're saying, despite the fact that it's degrading, because if you approach people from a sociological point of view, we are very social herd-like animals. Remember, sociology is the study of the anthill, and those ants think they're having individual thoughts, but when they're all the same individual thoughts, where's that coming from, right? Jung is an interesting character, and his stuff it gets weird, especially by the end of his career. It has hints of spirituality, and I don't want to go there today. I have no idea. Like, I read this, and I read people that talk about him, and I'm not sure if he believed this stuff or if the New Agers picked it up from him. I have no idea. But you'll notice that his idea of archetypes is, regardless if it's spiritual, well, we don't care about spiritual. If we're approaching it from a hive mind or a cultural stereotype perspective, the idea of archetypes works pretty well. If I stand up here and I can't find words, you're going to sit back there and say, I'm sitting up here going, oh, damn it, there's a word for that. You're sitting back there thinking, spacey professor, right? Like, you don't need to know me. All you need to do is to see me flub one word and bam, spacey professor. I have stereotypes about you, but we won't go there. I'm trying to think of some other ones. The example that I use in a lot of classes, and I hope it doesn't get too repetitive if I've already used it in here this year, but think about those kids shows, Disney shows and Nick shows. They always have the same lineup of characters, and they don't even put much thought into the characters, and the thing is, they don't actually have to. You've got the fat curly-haired kid that makes jokes. It's always the fat curly-haired kid that makes jokes. I don't know why they don't have a fat straight-haired kid that makes jokes. It's not part of the archetype, right? You've got London, who's too rich for her own good and dumb as a box of rocks. It's too easy to sell the dumb rich girl or the dumb pretty girl or the dumb rich pretty girl. You don't have to do any work because that character exists in the hive mind, right? All they have to do is throw it up there, and your brain does the work of building the story. Okay? I think we said this last time too. Even something like 50 Shades of Grey, yes, it's dirty, it's a little bit pornographic. The woman's also making a gazillion dollars off of her girl porn. Good for her. But isn't it kind of the easiest story in the book? Here's the mousy but virginal girl that's always overlooked for her beautiful roommate who's sexually aware by the beautiful rich man, and he picks her up. But as it turns out, he's a little bit damaged, and she can fix him. Hello. It's not like that story needs work. The skeleton of the story is there. You just need to fill it in. And she fills it in with, softcore porn. It would have been funny if they made the movie as a triple X instead of as an R, but that would be awful. Did you see it?
Yeah, I thought it was funny. Like, everyone was, oh my God, it's so good. And I'm like, I just stayed laughing the entire time. Something I couldn't keep a straight face.
That's funny. Down in front, she's saying that she went to see it and it was hard not to laugh. So there's that. Romeo and Juliet. Romeo and Juliet, the brilliant story isn't in the skeleton of the story. The skeleton of the story is a pretty easy formula, right? Two kids from different families fall in love, and they can't be together. Well, I'm not trying to diss Shakespeare because it is actually pretty good. But, that's a pretty easy story to tell because the story already exists. If you're a masterful storyteller, then what you can do is turn that into its own kind of neat new story. But the story already exists, okay? This is Jung's archetypes. And you can see where people take this and then almost get into the spiritual with it because what do you do with your good side and your bad side? You'll notice that your good side and your bad side is kind of about 60% of every religion that's out there, right? How do we foster our good side and keep our bad side from causing too much trouble in our lives? And when you start looking at Jung, he's got a sense of your good and your bad and your shadow and your projection, and don't worry about that. Or Jung even has this idea of the sacred or divine masculine and the divine feminine. Well, we certainly have gender stereotypes in our culture. We certainly have understandings of what we expect from men and women. And what Jung does is take that, put it into the culture, and then add a hint of spirituality to it. And it's not that far off from some of what you're going to read if you go looking in the Bible, but let's not go there. I'm thinking Genesis, but not today. Okay, and you'll notice that this is also how stereotypes work. And this is the problem with stereotypes. It doesn't matter how hard I try. Because you come into this class with an understanding of what a spacey professor is, almost everything I do is going to get filtered through that stereotype, right? And you're going to find plenty of examples of where that's a spacey professor. And in ways that I think I might be a special snowflake, an individual who's not a regular professor, whatever that is, I'm going to have to sit down and explain to you why I'm special. I'm not just a reflection of that archetype. That's stereotypes. And every single one of you deals with stereotypes and how they apply to your life. Yeah, we'll just leave it at that. Because mostly because I don't want to get hung up on that. All right, so think about this. A narrative then, we're talking about cultural stories. A narrative then has to fit the models that people already have in their heads. Okay, so if 50 Shades of Grey wasn't overlooked girl gets found by beautiful man, but turns out he's flawed and she can fix him, would that story sell as well as it did? No, I'm not 100% sure, but it would be a little bit weird if the gender roles were reversed. In fact, the show might not fly. Mousy but virginal boy who's always outshone by his macho roommate gets found by Demi Moore, who's flawed but beautiful and rich, and he can change her, right? It doesn't work. It doesn't work because it doesn't jive with our cultural narratives about men and women and how these stories are supposed to flow. Okay, any questions on this so far? Go ahead.
When you talk about preconceived ideas,
Absolutely, but even bigger than that, because it's not just that the ideas are in your head. They are preconceived. They're already there. It's that many of these ideas you downloaded from the culture without necessarily knowing it, okay? So, and here's where it gets a little bit tricky. Even if your preconceived ideas are a little bit different from the culture, and in fact, notice that all of us have a little bit of variation. What really matters is what's going on in the majority of people's heads, okay? So it might be awesome if I could reinvent 50 Shades of Grey as a lesbian sex story. And if I did a really good job, maybe I could sell it to lesbians, because, you know, I can write for lesbians. That would be great, and I'd hit this, 1 or 2% of people. And in today's world, you can get rich off of selling something to 1 or 2% of people. But the rest of the world's going to be like, oh, that's so stupid. It just doesn't jive with what's going on. Go ahead.
Wasn't that a very similar plot to the movie Pretty Woman 20 years ago?
Absolutely. Not except. Pretty Woman's also a fairly common one too. He is rich and beautiful. The only thing about Pretty Woman is she's like not overlooked, she's flawed. But she does get straightened up and out of prostitution, right? And Richard Gere turns out to be salvageable from a rich guy that just picks up hookers because he can get away with it. So it's absolutely very close. I get a kick out of this stuff. All right, it's so much fun. But this is, oops. Wait a minute. All right. I guess this is the one that I wrote. And this is where, again, this is going to have echoes of some of what we already talked about this semester. And if this is too repetitive, you have to tell me. So, if you look at the first point and think about how news stories works, this is why news is terrible, right? It's not that anybody's trying to lie to you. People talk about the left-wing bias of the news. People talk about the right-wing bias of the news. That is, sure, yeah, you bet. The bigger part is how the news tells stories that have to ring true to your demographic. Does that make sense? So, yes, like I'm thinking of the constellations. You look up and you see Orion. I used this example in class already this year. You look up and you see Orion, and somehow or other, this little box with 3 dots in the middle is supposed to be an archer, right? Now, I don't see an archer. I see a box with 3 dots in the middle. But the old timers, they would look up and they'd connect these dots and build a whole story about the characters in the sky based off of that, okay? Well, the facts, such as they are the dots, the stars. But it's hard to tell news based on facts because we want to tell news based on stories, right? The facts aren't interesting. It's the narrative behind the facts which are interesting. And the news's job is to tell you stories, okay? Now, I don't honestly think they're usually lying. In fact, they're trying to tell what they see as the truth. Go ahead.
I was about to say, one just got in trouble for lying. He said he was under, he was in a helicopter and they got shot down and stuff like that, whatever his name is. And
Brian Williams, yes.
He got in trouble for lying.
Sure.
He's trying to make himself look better, so.
I know, right? And so Brian Williams is a mainstream guy, so people think he's kind of lefty. So now folks have found that O'Reilly has made up some stuff because and again, well, not again, notice how quickly this whole thing deteriorates into a left versus right thing. Well, our guys might have lied some, but your guys lied more. that's really missing the fundamental point. The fundamental point is they have to sell ads. They have to sell ads by telling you stories. And so those stories have to jive with you. So every non-righty newspaper that's carrying stories about O'Reilly telling lies is collecting ad revenue every time you get pissed and click on it. Every conservative or right-wing, we should actually go with right-wing. Is this your right? Yeah, this is your right. The right-wing newspapers carrying stories about Brian Williams showing exactly why you can't trust the mainstream media, they're collecting ad hits every time you click on it, precisely because you know, right? If you're on those sites, you're on those sites because you know you can't trust the mainstream media. You know the mainstream media has a leftward bias. So obviously, the lefties are lying to drive their stories. Now, let's assume that their facts are true. Let's assume Brian Williams did lie about the helicopter. Notice that as a data point, that's not interesting. It's actually the larger story of why did he lie? How did he lie? How often did he lie? Is there more going on there, right? That he lied about the helicopter is a star. That Brian Williams may have fibbed a whole lot in his career and that he belongs to one of the mainstream media sources that we try and trust, but that the right doesn't trust for its leftward bias, that's Orion. See how that works? Now, as long as your preconceived notion is that you can't trust the mainstream media and that the mainstream media has a leftward bias, notice how what those other guys are doing isn't actually giving you facts. They're giving you a story that matches your preconceived notions. All right? Everybody does this. It's actually how news works. The next part is the emotion. I don't even want to pull up Hutch Huffington Post and see. Let's do it. I changed my mind. I do want to. We won't pull up Facebook though. All right, Huffington Post. Breaking news. Yeah, I don't know about that. I probably should know about stuff that's in the news. Oh, this is actually good. All right, so I don't know about the politics one, but look at this one. More crime. Wait. No, this one. LAPD shoots homeless man to death. Okay. How often do homeless people die in LA? Probably on a fairly regular basis. If this is true, it's a bad thing, but here's another one where you're going to find exactly this. The Free Thought Project. Okay, the Free Thought Project is kind of an anti-cop one. If you click too much looking for this story, you're going to end up on these guys' thing. All right? And what are their headlines? Okay? Now keep in mind, these guys get paid every time you click one of their stories. All right? And number one, this is a little bit hard to see. Coalition of police heads to D.C. to demand the broken and brutal police system be fixed. The broken and brutal police system. All right, if you're on this page, it's because you don't trust the cops. So of course, language like the broken and brutal police system feeds directly into your narrative about how the world works, right? I can't even see this. The second one here, blah, 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 the prison industrial complex at the Oscars. Again, that's it may be true, it may not be true, but the fact that you're on this page means this is the stuff you believe, right? And so then you go, okay. Here's a good one. Texas town experiences 61% drop in crime after firing their police department. Okay? Now, if you, perhaps, if you don't like the cops, if you think the cops are part of the quote unquote part of the problem, then this little headline here is tickling your funny bone. Oh, I got to see this. Of course. Because who are the bad guys? Well, if you're on this page, the cops are the bad guys. See what I'm saying? Now, it's hard to know what the stars in this constellation are, but if you're going to be an author for this page, your job is to troll BuzzFeed and Gawker and Reddit and any of the other Tumblr, any of the really quick, immediate internet sites. Try and find the earliest thing you can, and then build an Orion around whatever stars you find on that page. Does that make sense? Okay. And every time something is, heroic man stops armed robbery. Yeah. Police then charge him with a felony. That's this one here. Here we go. After cop kills woman in front of her husband and 4-year-old son, the police took the family dog too. Okay. I haven't researched any of these. I have no idea what is in any of these stories. I actually try and avoid the news for all the reasons I'm talking about here today. But if your preconceived notion is that the cops are the bad guy, and your bias is that you don't like cops, imagine how infuriating it is that the cops killed a woman in front of her child. Right? Here's the star. Let's build a story around it. Okay? So the big thing here isn't that the news is biased left or right. It's that the news is engaged in various levels of creative fiction writing. See what I'm saying? They're just going to write some story. It doesn't even matter if they're right. If it pisses you off and gets you to click it, they get paid. And then if it turns out they're wrong, they'll go back to that same site, that same page. And how quick do these pages update? Several times a day, several times an hour. So to go back to that same article that's now 3 days old and put a correction at the bottom, absolutely painless, absolutely effective-less. Wait, that would be ineffective. See, spacey professor forgetting words. I feel kind of bad picking on the cops, but that's what came up on HuffPost. And the Huff is kind of a little bit lefty. A deadly assault on academic freedom. That'll get the professors to watch it. What is that woman doing? Skipping on her treadmill. Okay. Ooh, toilet plunger. 36 ways you're messing up your child. That one's awesome. Because you know what? Everyone who has children is, I know I'm screwing them up somehow. What am I doing wrong? Right? What I learned as a man who lives with a feminist. Oh my God, who knows? We don't even, let's just get out of here quick. Okay. Now, if I were to pull up Tumblr, notice it's going to be all the social justice thing, right? It's going to be, I can't believe he actually said girls like ballet. What a sexist asshole. I only ever see 2 guys there, and it's scads and scads of little girls. But if you live in a world that's a feminist world, everything somebody says that sounds like it's stereotyping women or constraining women, bam, that fits your narrative. You don't go any further. Go ahead.
That's the victim mentality, isn't it?
Here's the thing. You could call parts of feminism the victim mentality, but that's kind of a specific thing. The larger picture that I'm getting at here is how the whole thing has to fit into what you're doing, right? So if I was a savvy web dude, and I'm not, because this is what I do for a living, but if I was a savvy web dude, I would absolutely start a Tumblr blog to fit in with the social justice chicas. And you know what I'd do then? I'd start a piss them off manly blog. Because the biggest thing is trying to foster enough frustration that you can drive traffic. Right? That sounds pretty straightforward. And if I can get more traffic and I can get clicked through to my news sites, bingo, you win. Go ahead.
Just kind of like, after class, we were talking about how, back in the 70s, at Saturday Night Live, they said, what they said then, you could not get away with saying today. Like when I brought up the episode with Chevy Chase and Richard Pryor, and Chevy Chase said the N-word and it wasn't blurted. And I mean, it was, Richard Pryor had agreed on the skit. It was all in joking fun and everything, but if Chevy Chase was to say something like that to Richard Pryor today, all the world would come to an end and stuff like that in a sense. But, that's what we were talking about then, They got away with a lot of stuff. Trying to say some of the stuff they said then, like about cocaine and, what was it, the race riots that were going on then and sexism, and you couldn't get away with it today.
Yeah, we're in a different place, definitely, especially when it comes to the culture wars. I'm kind of impressed it seems to even be going on in like the high schools and the middle schools. But that's a whole nother discussion. That's a fun discussion. And yeah, you're absolutely right. But see, these things do change over time, and so the way that you play into them changes over time. But there's one other thing which I think I should actually say. If we go back to 1970 whatever, the news was better, and it was less biased, and there's a very specific reason for this. So how does Saturday Night Live get paid? They get paid through their advertisement, right? And they were known, especially then, for going too far. And that's part of what was funny. But as long as they were doing that, and they had a stable demographic, that's absolutely fine. In today's world, we could find them. It'll just be on something like a Stormfront website. That's a white power website. Don't go there in class. We could find that sort of thing, and we could find humor that was over the top, but you're not going to find it on mainstream TV because people are very, very sensitive on the whole. But look at how the big difference here is how the internet has changed the funding of things. Okay, so if we go back to 1970 and we look at the news, the TV news was actually seen as what retail people would call a loss leader. So you lost money on your news department because it built the reputation of your network. So CBS had kick butt news so that you trusted CBS and you were there already after the news show started to play. And you trusted CBS, okay? The New York Times, like this is echoed if you go all the way back to like the turn of the last century. News has never actually been that great. We had sort of a middle period where the news was good. You go back to the turn of the last century, and you may even remember this from your grade school classes. People talked about yellow journalism and muckraking. The news then was about selling papers, but selling papers one paper at a time. So the obnoxious headlines were what drove sales, right? The New York Times actually evolved as a subscription model to reduce the stupidity, okay? Because if we went back then, you've just got some, little street urchin hawking newspapers. Here's the headline, and instead of the click, he's getting paid for a nickel every time you buy a paper, right? So the more obnoxious the headlines, the more papers he can sell. It doesn't matter if there's no content because the headlines are what's driving it, all right? So in today's world, all of the news industry has been squeezed tremendously. And notice how this is a structural change coming from the way the world works, the new world works. The New York Times and the Wall Street Journal are both subscription-driven still, and that makes them better. But most others, you can go get your news for free, and so you don't pay to support the Macon paper. I'm not saying the Macon paper sucks at all. I'm just, as an example, most of the papers in the world that are like the Macon paper have been squeezed, and a lot of them have shut down. I don't know where they stand right now. Hopefully they're doing okay. Yes. Yes. Okay. Now, so the story I started with, you'll note that the idea that Rachel Ray, beautiful Italian cooking Rachel Ray, might be in an open marriage to an older guy that doesn't love her appropriately. Notice how that's like a sex-driven emotion story, right? The reason I start with that story is because even though I know how this razzle-fragging game works, I fall for it. It's ridiculous how simple we are. Absolutely ridiculous. Oh, well, let's check it out. Click. Wait, that's not news. There you go. Yeah, all right. So I don't want to go too far on news because then there's also NPR. The whole reason NPR came up was, well, if the government supports something so it's outside of the commercial pressures, then ideally you'd have a world of unbiased news as well. And if you think of a world where, like in 1970, a world where all of the major TV stations were willing to lose money on news to get the best news, and where you had national newspapers who were subscription-driven to drive for the best news, not the most sensational news, and you had competition from a government-funded, supposedly neutral news site, you've actually got a world where something like Watergate could break. And Watergate brought down Nixon. WikiLeaks, arguably bigger, Now, there's different sides to WikiLeaks, but I'm sure there were different sides to Watergate as well. In our world, even really big news doesn't seem to even matter. It's weird. It's weird. Okay, so number 2 here is reflecting and manipulating social psychology in advertisement. So if you go look on the YouTube page or the YouTube playlist that I got along with this class, I don't know if I put that in the D2L or not, but the link's on the syllabus at least. There's one in there called Still Killing Us Softly. And except it's Still Killing Us Softly version like 14, because this woman's been doing the same video presentation for the last 30 years. The sad thing is that the video presentation is that the reality hasn't changed that much, and so the video presentation, she uses new stuff, but otherwise it doesn't change. And her points are pretty straightforward. If you pay attention to advertisement, you'll notice a handful of fairly stock images of women and some fairly disturbing elements of what goes on. Number 1, how do you sell something? Female sexual objectification, right? Throw some boobs on it and you can sell it. It doesn't matter what it is. And I'm not being crass, that's actually the way it works. You can even get professors who know better to click on Rachel Ray. So when you start wondering, why do you need female sexuality to sell everything? That's a legitimately interesting question, but it's there. The second thing that you're going to notice if you start paying attention to advertisement featuring women is they're often kind of dismembered. It'll be parts of a woman, right? It'll be legs, it'll be breasts, it'll be torso shots, it'll be arms, it'll be kind of weirdly how often it's not a whole person. But in a world where women are valued for their sexual objectivity, we don't need them as a whole person, do we? And in fact, the whole person isn't what sells my stuff. The sexuality is what sells my stuff, right? So they're getting chopped up. You really got to go check out this woman's YouTube. It's sort of awesome. The third point is, and you guys know this, all the youngsters are talking about thigh gap. The third point is that the women who are on media and advertisement aren't even real women. And what's changed in 30 years is that Photoshop has made it so no one you see on TV is a real woman, right? I shouldn't say TV because that takes too much work, but no one you see in still photography is a real woman. They're completely overhauled. And so if your idea of what people look like comes from advertisement, you're going to be sorely disappointed when you go out into the regular world and bump into actual humans, right? We're all uglier than on TV. On the one hand, that's fine. It's a free market. It's a free speech. You can do what you want. But on the other hand, and there's sort of perhaps a feminist point in this, what a weird world for our daughters to grow up in, right? It's a world where the women are skinny like 13-year-old girls. It's a world where their thighs don't even touch, and that's a goal. Ew. It's like making love to a skeleton, a 12-year-old skeleton at that. It is creepy. Now, I'm sort of joking, but part of what I'm getting at here is that there's this kind of a loop-de-loop which is going on, all right? On the one hand, a lot of what we get, a lot of what ends up in our heads, if you've been listening throughout the semester, comes from what's out there in the world. So you can't help it, but what you think about women comes from exactly those ads. Exactly those ads. You hate them. You know they're manipulating you, but you see thousands of ads every single damn day. And what are you doing to counteract that? How many regular women are you looking at naked to offset what Victoria's Secret is putting in your head on their own? It ain't happening, right? And in fact, you probably feel like a creep Googling up regular naked women to look at them to offset Victoria's Secret ads. Maybe you should feel like a creep. I don't know what to say. Okay, so they're right in suggesting that media or advertisement and advertisement's ideals influence how we think about the world, right? But this is where the roundabout turns around again, or where the reciprocity starts, the reciprocal relationship. Why do these companies consistently use female imagery in this way? Why don't they use male imagery in the same way? And the answer is because it works, right? So as much as we want to claim that the advertising world is the problem, you're the problem, and I'm the problem, right? Every time we buy a Cosmo that's got 41 new ways to have sex on the cover, and
41 new ways every month.
yeah, it's like they're trying to reinvent the wheel here. Every time you click on Rachel Ray and her open marriage, every time you buy, well, I mean, it's sort of a joke, except it's not really. If I were to go pick up a Cosmo or something, how likely am I to find a scantily clad woman selling tampons? You know, I gotta say, in my head, those don't really go together. I can understand how in a woman's head they might go together. But really? And the answer is yes. And when you buy that brand, guess what? We're part of it. So complaining about this sort of advertisement, if we don't recognize and alter our own buying behavior, or start sending letters to companies, and you know, who's got time to send letters to companies, right? Best thing you can do is buy something, buy the other thing. But what if they make the best product, right? This is where you end up trapped in this loop. I don't like the imagery, but I buy their product, so I reinforce their imagery, their use of that imagery, And then they make that imagery, and that's what's in my head. So of course that imagery is what works on me, and around and around and around and around and around.
Is it kind of like that Chevy truck commercial, you know, it's the same guy, he's in front of the car, but then he put him in front of the truck, like, what kind of beard would the guy with the car grow? He grows soul patch. What about the guy with the truck? He grow mutton chops. What kind of animal does the guy with the truck own? He owns a tarantula and a rattlesnake. What kind of animals does the guy with the car own? Birds, you know. So,
I didn't see that one, but I like it.
yeah.
My favorite for these are Dodge. I love the video system in here. Nope. Shut up. Stop. All right. Yeah, loud, because I'm deaf. Not that loud.
And on the 8th day, God looked down on his planned paradise and said, I need a caretaker. So God made a farmer. God said, I need somebody willing to get up before dawn, milk cows, work all day in the fields, milk cows again, eat supper, then go to town and stay past midnight at the meeting of the school board. So God made a farmer. God said, I need somebody willing to sit up all night with a newborn colt and watch him die, and dry his eyes and say, maybe next year. I need somebody who can shape an axe handle from a persimmon sprout, shoe a horse with a hunk of car tire, who can make harness out of hay wire, feed stacks, and shoe scraps, who planting time and harvest season will finish his 40-hour week by Tuesday noon, and then painting from tractor back put in another 72 hours. So God made a farmer. God said, I need somebody strong enough to clear trees and heave bales, yet gentle enough to yean lambs and wean pigs and tend to paint combed pullets, who will stop his mower for an hour to splint a broken leg of meadowlark. So God made a farmer. It had to be somebody who'd plow deep and straight and not cut corners. Somebody to seed, weed, feed, breed, and rake and disc and plow and plant and tie the fleece and strain the milk. Somebody who'd bail a family together with the soft, strong bonds of sharing. Who would laugh and then sigh and then reply with smiling eyes when his son says that he wants to spend his life doing what Dad does. So God made a farmer.
All right, that one's awesome. Ooh. Where'd Eminem go? Yeah. All right, big. No, get out of
I got
here.
a question for you. What does this city know about luxury? Huh? What does a town that's been to hell and back know about the finer things in life? Well, I'll tell you, more than most. You see, it's the hottest fires that make the hardest steel. That hard work and conviction, and the know-how that runs generations deep in every last one of us. That's who we are. That's our story. Now, it's probably not the one you've been reading in papers, the one being written by folks who've never even been here and don't know what we're capable of. Because when it comes to luxury, it's as much about where it's from as who it's for. Now, we're from America, but this isn't New York City, or the Windy City, or Sin City, and we're certainly no one's Emerald City.
This is no longer city. And this is what we do.
All right, one more. I know you guys, but these are awesome.
Please, let's go.
Dad, I don't want to go to Aunt Judy's. The game's on and she doesn't even have a TV.
The things that make us Americans are the things we make. The things that make us Americans are the things we make. This has always been a nation of builders, craftsmen, men and women for whom straight stitches and clean wells were matters of personal pride. We made the skyscrapers and the cotton gins, Colt revolvers, Jeep 4x4s. These things make us who we are. As a people, we do well when we make good things and not so well when we don't. The good news is, this can be put right. We just have to do it. And so we did. This, our newest son, was imagined, drawn, carved, stamped, hewn, and forged here in America. It is well made, and it is designed to work. This was once a country where people made things, beautiful things. And so it is again. The new Jeep Grand Cherokee.
Nope, stop.
The things that make us Americans.
That's a good one to leave on the board. Okay, I could do this all. I swear, Dodge, Chrysler makes commercials just for my class. If you watch those three are all made by Dodge Chrysler. One was Dodge truck, one was the Chrysler 200, and the third was the Grand Cherokee, the new Grand Cherokee, which is not new anymore because that's like a 2011 commercial. If you watch those, you'll notice that they didn't really say much about the product they were selling, right? Do we know how many horsepower that Dodge truck that the farmer has? Do we know its pulling capacity? Do we know its carrying capacity? No. All things which might be important to a farmer. The Chrysler 200, do we know, I mean, they're saying it's they're aiming it at an affordable luxury thing, but in my world, an affordable luxury thing better to be able to keep up with a Beamer. So does it have the engine? We don't know. Does it have the performance? We don't know. What do we know? M&M. And the same thing with the Grand Cherokee, right? Again, fun car, awesome little truck. Do we know anything about the four-wheel drive system? Nope, but they show it on a dirt road. Okay. You'll notice what those commercials do, each and every one of them, is drill down into all of that stuff I was just talking about. Those narratives and that emotion. Every single one of those commercials is its own story and taps into a story about what's going on in the world. If you look at the God Made a Farmer, anyone who has even a remotely rural background tears up at that, right? Everything that a farmer could hope to be is captured in that. From the guy that'll take time out of his day to fix a broken leg on a little bird, to the one that, to the man who's strong enough to make things happen, but nurture the spring lambs, right? They show acres and acres and acres of rural imagery. There's no music. And Paul Harvey was sort of an Americana legend. The youngsters in here won't remember him, but Paul Harvey was a truth talker from the old days. He called it straight. He didn't cut any corners. He's an honest guy. And the old people that this is aimed at, it's not aimed at millies. It's aimed at people my age and up, because who can afford one of those trucks? Are you kidding? A real farmer would buy used, because that's just ridiculous. That's funny. And there's quite a lot of God in there. And I don't know if you've noticed, but there's a lot of God in rural America. For good or bad, doesn't really matter. And do you think they're starting Dodge's day with a prayer? Hey, before we turn on the factory, let's say a prayer, right? No, maybe they do. But the bigger thing is they're trying to connect with an audience that believes in rurality, that believes in a man that's both strong and gentle and nurturing, right? In an old-fashioned way, not some modern metrosexual willy-nilly way. And they're using imagery that if you're from that life, it will make you tear up, okay? Then bam, we go to the Chrysler 200. Now you'll also notice that while the imagery in the Dodge commercial was heavily white, they were also very careful to have a couple of minorities here and there, and even a little girl farmer, because they will get taken to the bank and back if they don't. And let's face it, in today's world, you do want to speak to girls because girls are farmers. And while the old-fashioned farmers may have been strongly white, in today's world, the rural landscape demographically is changing very much. So you would not have a Hispanic family if indeed you wanted to sell those trucks. You have to include them. And all of this is happening on the below the level. You're just watching this, having an art experience that, if you are from this life, is tickling your soul and making you a little weepy, right? The Chrysler 200 commercial and the Grand Cherokee commercial both speak to everything that's happened since the most recent recession. Now, it helps that the Dodge Grand Cherokee one is like 2011, so it's only 3 years after the crash. And the Chrysler 200 one, the M&M one, I think is the year after. But you'll notice, while things are looking a little bit better now, that if we're completely back where we were, and I'm not sure we are, but even if we are completely back where we were, the crash was 2008, this is 2014, this is 2015. We're talking about a 7-year recession that altered everybody's life. I mean, that's pretty hardcore. So if they're going to sell $30,000 and $40,000 vehicles in the middle of a recession, they have to work pretty hard to do it, okay? And you'll notice both of them focus on what makes America, America. Well, actually, so does the Dodge Farmer one, doesn't it? It's just what makes rural America, rural America. And clearly, the M&M one is aimed at a younger audience. I do believe the price point for the 200 was quite a bit lower than the Jeep Grand Cherokee. I don't know if people much older than me like M&M. I'm not sure if people my age like M&M. Sort of. But you can also tell by the music. What's going on in the background, like in South Georgia here, everyone knows this. What's going on in the background of the Grand Cherokee commercial is it's a bass line from Johnny Cash, right? Now, there's no singing, but anyone, again, who likes Americana, who likes the outdoors, who's not from New York City, so I always hear those Pace commercials in my head. Anyone that's not from New York City is going to recognize that as Cash. And you just don't get more traditional Americana than Cash. They don't say it. They don't even play the whole song. You might not recognize it if you don't know what you're looking for, but it brings up the emotionality that's associated with that music. And then they start talking about, we're going to bounce back from this. And we're going to bounce back because of our pride, and the pride in the things that we do, right? And if this commercial is speaking to you, if you're the demographic for this, and they're doing their job right, you should get a little misty. Now, we could go on down the line. You could do the one that has been on the last couple of years with Cadillac and the Escalade, the Fame song. Well, never mind. And you'll notice it's aimed at a different demographic, but different demographics buy different cars, right? And so they need to know what they're going to do. They need to know what they're doing. This is all emotional. This is all below the level of rational thought. When you go to buy a car, you're thinking, should I buy this one? Should I buy this one? You know, does it fit all the kids? Or we're going to have to rent a car when the relatives come visit? How much horsepower? Does it go fast? Is the mileage good? You're having what you think is a rational conversation with yourself about what car you're going to buy. But if Dodge Chrysler did their job correctly, you're actually being driven by the feeling that the Grand Cherokee gives you. Like you get in and you feel like you're doing the right thing for America. And it's not anything cognizant, right? They're showing you pictures, and if you pay attention, like all of the imagery, they're showing you pictures of the Jeep, the real Jeep, right? The Willys Jeep from war days liberating Europe. Can we ever aspire to anything better as the U.S. than getting involved in somebody else's huge problem, protecting them from terrible bullies? Now, I don't actually know if that's what was going on in World War II because I'm not a historian, but I know that that's how we phrase it, and it makes us feel good. They're speaking to the very best in us in doing this, okay? And we respond to that emotionality, okay? So, and trains, right? Gotta love trains. Boom. So, that emotion, those narratives, we saved Europe, right? We bounce back. We take pride in what we do. We, as men, at least, aspire to be both strong and gentle and nurturing. Why, it's the very definition of being a husband, right? Now, do they care if that's an old-fashioned understanding of masculinity? No, because young men can't buy $45,000 pickups, right? They're actually trying to aim a masculinity that fits people my age and older because maybe we could. See how it works? And so if they don't reflect the social psychology of the group, they're not going to sell anything. But in trying to reflect the social psychology of the group, notice how they end up reinforcing it, right? It's a chicken and egg problem. And it's the same thing with those, I just love those Dodge Chrysler commercials, but it's no different than an Axe deodorant commercial that, 14-year-old boys are going to be all over with sexy girls, right? How do you sell crap to 14-year-old boys? Show them they might be effective with women like that. And they'll line up and throw money at you. Okay, now, and reflecting culture and entertainment, I kind of already got that. But again, if you have an understanding of what these narratives are that exist in the culture and what these archetypes are, this is where you can start to see exactly why our media is so annoyingly fragmented. They're not doing art, right? In a sense, they're doing, you know how those Kraft slices you buy, it says cheese product. It's not actually cheese, it's cheese product. Well, our media industry is not actually art, it's art product. And it's tested and tested and tested and tested and tested and tested and tested to make sure that it speaks to you as closely as possible, or at least to as many of you in your demographic as possible. Actual art would be playing with those symbols, and you're just not going to get that in mainstream media because mainstream media has too much on the line. They gotta sell stuff. They have to sell stuff or they're not going to fly. And if they don't sell stuff, that's bad for all of us. Like, seriously, we want Dodge, Jeep, Chrysler to keep selling cars because that keeps automaking here in the United States. That supports American jobs. Even if we think their advertisements are kind of cheesy, we want those American companies to do well, right? So here's the thing. The headline here, anytime you're outraged or sexed up or anything else powerful from media, not from art. Like if you're getting this from a museum, good for you. But if you're getting it from the media, you're being used. You are a tool. The definition of a tool, because you are being used to sell products for these guys. I love the Paul Harvey commercial. All of my rural relatives love the Paul Harvey commercial. But the fact that Dodge can make me misty about the old Midwest, which is mostly gone now anyway, just means that they reached out successfully and, right, danced their little puppet string, and I danced. That's the same thing of all of them. Anytime that there's something a little bit sexy and you click through, I'm not going to blame you. I'm not going to blame me, right? Go Rachel. But they're about using the oldest trick in the book to pull that particular puppet string. And outrage. I don't care what your outrage is. I love feminism. I hate Obama. I hate cops. It doesn't matter what your outrage is. Every little one of those outrages is another puppet string, right? Oh man, I'm so mad. Let me click through and write comments so other people can look on that blog, right? Dance, 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 dance. This is a hard concept for people to get, and it can be a little bit challenging to even communicate it because we're not likely to, unless you've been halfway through a sociology course, we're not likely to believe that the outside world has that much influence over your soul. But once you see the patterns, it becomes undeniable. And once you see how those patterns are attached to revenue generation, you can start to break them, right? Before you click on that sexy headline, you can say to yourself, am I going to get something out of this? Or you can actually just strip Facebook of all the news and outrage porn. You can decide, you can decide to buy that car or not without necessarily recognizing exactly how, well, you can decide to buy it recognizing how much you've been influenced. You know what? I'm going to buy the Cherokee. I don't even care. Why? Because damn it, I like Johnny Cash. If you can say that, you're not being manipulated quite as much. But when you're saying, oh, it's just perfect. I love Cash and I love America and I love Jeep. I'm a Jeep guy. Dance, 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 dance. The song I started with that I was playing is Rage Against the Machine's Bullet in the Brain. The simple fact that, what was the reference I used just a little minute ago? Oh, the simple fact that every time I want to say New York City, get a rope, that's what they're talking about. Where does that come from? Again, it might be a little bit of an aged reference, but Pace Pecani Sauce years ago ran a whole series of things, and the tagline was, right, well, this one's from New York City, right? The fact that I can't say New York City without Pace's tagline in my head, that's the bullet that Rage Against the Machine is talking about. It's in my brain because I can't excise that crap for the life of me. Like send in a little delete button, right? Delete! Doesn't work that way. And when you leave here, I want you to pay attention to how much advertisement you're subjected to and how much even the stuff you choose to subject yourself to in terms of media content is itself as formulaic and shallow as advertisement. This will make you a better media consumer. It will make your brain a happier place. And if that's all you get out of sociology, I'm okay with that. But your grades won't be very good. All right, thanks. Have a good day.